Welcome to TalkBack today. Following the sermon series this morning, we are going to be talking about an attitude of gratitude. And hopefully, you submitted your questions in the chat room. Brad?
All right. Our first question is, how do you focus on what you're grateful for rather than the negative? Sometimes the negative outweighs the things you're grateful for.
Christy?
Thanks. I'm trying to think. So sometimes for example, when I'm driving to work, if I'm like super anxious or nervous about something happening, or if I'm just having a hard time, um, I find that trying to look for things to be thankful for helps me to kind of switch it in my mind, kind of get my
Right,
brain going in the
right.
right place, if that makes any sense. And I try to do like nature things, like when I'm driving, like usually the sun's coming up because I have to be there so early. So like I might see the sun coming up in the sky, or like notice something pretty on the horizon or something like that. That's one thing that helps me. What about you?
Right. I think, well, hopefully in the message this morning, I hit on this. I think it's a conscious decision
Hmm.
because we can stay focused on the negative, or we can choose to try to look at the good in everything. Even some of the worst situations that we experience, something good has to come out of it. And for me, when it comes to the goodness of people
Hmm.
and not focusing on the negative, I always try to go back to we are created in the image of God. So
Hmm.
even those people that irritate us the most
Right.
and cause us to get in this dark place, there has to be something about them
Hmm.
that is good because they're made in the image of God.
That's a good point, and it's hard to do too,
It
though,
is
right?
hard to there are a couple of people that are coming to mind right now.
Yes, I understand
So,
that.
yeah,
Well, I liked how you said earlier when you were talking about your example, um, when you were talking about the person who like woke up late and
right.
their shirt wasn't ready, and we've all had days
Someone
like
was
that.
listening. Someone was
Yes.
listening to.
So, and I've had days like that where when I go to get in my car, like I'm already angry,
Right,
or I'm
right.
already
And the
upset
day's just
or
started. Yeah,
nervous, and I'm like trying to do my breathing. I'm like, well, that's not good. It's not
right,
even 7 o'clock in the morning.
right.
Um, but I liked how you talked about, because I do this too. You know, you can kind of bring yourself in when you say, you know what, at least I have a job.
Right,
I'm thankful
right,
that I have a job to go to.
right.
That kind of thing. So
Especially today with the high
yes,
unemployment,
yes,
that's it's very situational
it
for
is.
right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
That was a good point.
yeah. Great, thanks. I'm just glad someone was listening.
I was listening.
Yeah, it was great. We all listened. All right. How can you help someone who struggles to see that things are to be grateful, even when they are pain, sorrow, and challenges? How can you help someone who struggles to see that there are things to be grateful for, even when there's pain, sorrow, and challenges? So, you
And
guys.
you want me to go first?
I can, or it doesn't matter.
Go ahead.
One way that I have done that is by using humor. Um,
Yeah,
my oldest stepdaughter came here with her 18-month-old a few years ago, and they stayed with Adam and I for a while until she could like find a job and get settled and that kind of thing. And um, being a single mom and all that, super stressful, And so I was watching her, go out, get a job and go out to work for the first time, and like watching her anxiety, because I have anxiety, and she's making all these lists and stuff, which can be helpful. But I was trying to like help her kind of get out of that stress nerve
right.
state of mind, and so I looked at her and I was like, well, at least your daughter's not twins. At least you only have
Right,
one. You can be
right,
thankful for the fact that you
right,
have one child, not two,
right, right,
or something
right.
like that. So, like, if you can kind of do something like that to try to make somebody laugh, or, hopefully it'll like switch their brain. Like, Andre and I have talked a lot about the fight or flight, and, when you're like, oh,
Right.
and you're trying to get back to like your upstairs brains, what we talk about, call it at school. Um, Sometimes humor can help.
Well, I'm right there with you, Christy. I like to use humor sometimes in the most inappropriate or
Me too.
inappropriate places.
Yeah.
But, but I think when I served in the local church, I had to do a lot of pastoral care
Mhm.
and counseling, and often related to people that were either grieving or they were just things were bad in their life. And so when I think about some of those situations, some of those were more deeply rooted. I mean, there were psychological and in some cases chemical issues
Mhm.
to where people could not find happiness, and that's a whole different scenario of getting those people to the right healthcare professionals to help them. But uh, when I think about some of the folks that I've walked along beside of who can't find that happiness, it is to just be there,
Mhm.
just be, and to help uh, people realize that no matter how difficult things are, how unhappy they are, they can't see the goodness, that they're not walking that journey alone. So um, that that's kind of what floats to the top for me related to that
Mhm.
question.
Mhm. Definitely.
All right. This comes from your sermon, so someone else was listening.
Oh.
How do you look past the low hanging fruit, the obvious things, to find gratitude for other things?
So I go first.
Sure. You go first.
Well, I think, and I think I said this at the end of the message. Um, Go ahead and I'm a very visual person.
Me too.
And I realize not everyone is a visual person, but I'm a visual person. So go ahead and list that low hanging fruit. Go ahead and put it out there on paper. I think Josh used newsprint, put it on like we did in the office, and put it on the wall. Whatever it is,
Mhm.
go ahead and get it out there. Look at it, give thanks for it, acknowledge that it is present in your life, and then that's off limits. And then push yourself to look away from those so that then you can kind of free yourself up. I think for me personally, it was just like the picture that was displayed during at the end of the message. In nature,
Mhm.
you can find so many ways that God blesses us, whether it is the beauty of nature or it's your experience of that beauty.
Mhm.
And so often I'll tell people, you just need to get some distance from whatever it is that's making you unhappy, whatever it is that's causing you problems. And sometimes that's a person too, not just a thing or a situation, but a person. Remove yourself so that you can get the distance. That's why I think it's so important, why I wanted to challenge everybody this week to continue with the meditation
Mhm.
before they get to their gratitude list, because therefore they're able to free their minds to open up to the things that they may not see usually.
Mhm. Well, that's a good way to describe that. Like, because when you do your meditation, kind of puts you in the right place
Right,
to, like, it calms you down so that you
right,
can think
right,
and you can think past some of the more obvious things. Like all of those things that you said, it made me think of my students. Like when you ask a student what they're most thankful for, most of the time they say, my mom, my dad, my church, my friends,
right,
things like that.
right.
So, trying to go to a deeper place or a more abstract place, um, that can be hard.
Yeah,
It's not an
especially for
easy
some people,
thing.
many people aren't wired that way. Some people can go there naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Others have to really work to get there. So that's where walking along beside someone, they can be encouraged and you share,
Mm-hmm.
you communicate. This is what I do. This is how I see things, and this is how I get to this place. So a lot of it's just about communication.
Well, and I think sometimes you can be thankful for the person that is not going to leave you in a time of
Right. Especially loneliness.
horrible,
Yeah.
yes, or horrible
Yeah.
sorrow, or say someone really close to you passed away. Like a lot of people, they can't handle that,
Right.
and so a lot of times people will treat someone that's lost a loved one like a leper, like they're afraid it's going to like rub off on them or something, like you find out who your friends are,
Right.
that kind of thing, the people
Right.
that can't hang with you when you're in a really, really bad place. Um, that's a tough thing. So it's good to have somebody that is going to be there
Right.
so that you can focus on that person maybe and just be thankful that you have someone to sit beside you,
Right.
even if that's all they're doing. That's a big, big deal.
Well, and from a theological point of view, that's what Jesus did.
Right.
Jesus went among the people, and he walked among them. He talked among them in hopes that the people would learn those ways
Mm-hmm.
of being a follower and growing. So when we do that, and I realize this is really old school and dates me, but the WWJD, what would Jesus do?
Yes.
So often, that's all we have to ask ourselves.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right.
Okay, and one last one here that so far is: are there any other passages in the Bible that reference being grateful besides yours today from Colossians?
Oh my gosh, when I did a search, they were all over the place. Um, and to be honest with you, when Andrea asked me to preach today about gratitude and thankfulness, I immediately thought that I would end up somewhere in the Psalms, because the Psalms are all about praising God for what God's done and rejoicing in that praising and calling attention to those things that people are thankful for. So, the wonderful thing about Google is that people can
look it up.
can look it up. But I would certainly be willing after the fact, or by the time this is posted online, to get a list of some of the key ones.
That's a good idea.
That we could include with TalkBack.
And I think of, and you probably where this is. I think Paul said this. I thank my God every time I think of you.
Right. Paul,
that Paul?
says it all the time. Yeah.
Okay. And he's
All the
talking
time.
to a church, right?
Right. He's talking
Okay.
to a church.
So I like that one. That's the one that kind of pops in my head, and not just applying it to West, but also you can apply it to a person or a situation or
Right.
God or
Right. And you're right. That's another reason why I wasn't too surprised that I ended up with Colossians 3, because Paul always is showing gratitude for the new believers
Mhm.
and the struggle that they're having. I mean, that was the whole purpose in the text today.
Mhm.
The new followers of Christ were kind of slipping, falling behind. And I thought, how appropriate is that? Because those of us that proclaim to be followers of Christ struggle with that every day.
Absolutely.
The temptations to kind of backslide as an old, I grew up in a town heavily influenced by Baptist, backsliding.
Yes.
And of course, as a Methodist, we were always backsliding compared to the others. But, I think it's just important to, especially when someone asks a question about what Scripture, I will be glad to provide a list of, maybe 5 to 10. But Scripture is so personal.
Mhm.
If you don't just read it.
Okay.
But if you really open, you noticed when I read the Scripture in the sermon, I said, free your minds and your hearts to the transforming Word. And when we do that, we will have different experiences of the Scripture itself. So although we can provide a list, I would encourage people to just Google it, jump around and looking at different scriptural passages and see which ones resonate with them.
Find something that speaks.
Because it's going to change based on where you are in life, what
your experience, your
the whole
tradition, all of that.
Right.
Okay. Yes.
And
I agree.
You just said something that triggered in me when it comes to the Scripture. So when people start researching this and digging into that, there's this thing in the United Methodist Church called the Wesleyan Quadrilateral. And it talks about how Scripture tradition, experience, and reason are the
Mm-hmm.
4 areas that help us to fully understand and explore Scripture living within us. So Google that as well, folks.
Yes, we had a very interesting when I was in seminary. One of my colleagues was having kind of a faith crisis, and I remember he wrote up on the board, like we had all single rooms. It was like men on one side and women on the other, and we shared a kitchen, that kind of thing. And he wrote up on the board reason, experience, scripture, and tradition. And he wanted everybody that came down our hallway, whoever it was, to write which ones came, number them in order for me. Like, what's more important to you, or what do you think is the most important? So I always think about that when I'm like, okay, because you could be coming at this from, lots of different
Right,
ways and
right.
different experiences and different people, and so
Well, and I
that's
think it's
interesting.
really interesting because West is not a traditional faith community.
Right.
So, whether the folks that participate with West are aware of it or not, they're processing that, this is not what I grew up in.
Me neither.
Not what I grew up in. And it's not, when I was in parish ministry, it's not what I served.
Yeah.
So, I bring that previous experience, of which was very traditional,
Yes.
to this. So I have to realign through that process.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the same with the Scripture is the point that I'm trying to make.
Okay, I got you. That makes sense.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, that's all of our questions for this week. We thank you all for joining us, and thank you very much for being our host.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. It's great to be with all of you. Thank you.
Have a great week.